Everyone believes the United States dollar was born out of independence, that it was the coin of freedom, minted from the same spirit that wrote the Constitution. But the truth is more paradoxical. America's money was designed as a constraint, not a liberation. The Coinage Act of 1792 wasn't just about creating coins. It was about creating obedience, not to kings, but to arithmetic. Imagine a brand new nation, fresh from revolution, broke and exhausted. Its paper money, the Continental, had already collapsed in a storm of inflation so brutal that the phrase, "not worth a Continental," became an insult. So in 1792, Congress promised a remedy: honest metallic money, gold and silver, fixed by law. $1, defined as 371.25 grains of pure silver. $20.67 for an ounce of gold. Simple, rational, scientific. But here's the twist. By fixing gold and silver together in law, America tied itself to two moving targets. The price of gold and silver shifts with markets, discoveries, wars, and trade. Yet the law commanded they must move together. The Coinage Act locked two wild animals into the same cage and called it stability. The official story says this was the birth of a sound currency. The deeper truth is that it was the birth of an illusion, the illusion that law can overpower mathematics. The Founding Fathers, in their wisdom, tried to make money moral by giving it a physical body, metal. But in doing so, they created the first American monetary contradiction, a double standard pretending to be one. Look at the names behind it. Alexander Hamilton, the Treasury Secretary who believed order was more important than freedom. Thomas Jefferson, who distrusted banks but signed off on the very law that made them powerful. And George Washington, a general turned president, who knew that revolutions aren't really won by armies, but by whoever controls the coinage. What they built in 1792 was not just a mint, it was a belief system, a promise that the value of a dollar could be defined forever. But every promise in finance has a hidden beneficiary, and this one favored the creditors, those who own gold, silver, or debt, not the farmers and workers who needed to borrow. Because when money is frozen by law, debt becomes liquid by default. The elite could lend and demand repayment in a unit that never bends, while everyone else is trapped in the fluctuations of real life, crops, wages, weather. The Coinage Act was sold as fairness, but it quietly restored hierarchy. Metallic money, yes, but metallic justice too. 2 centuries later, the United States would forget that law almost completely. Yet its ghost still haunts every dollar bill, every debate over sound money, every central bank decision pretending to be neutral. The Coinage Act of 1792 wasn't a mere statute. It was the original script of the American financial empire. To understand how the Coinage Act of 1792 was born, we have to enter the mind of one man, Alexander Hamilton. Not the Broadway hero with a rap beat behind him, but the architect of a system built to make debt immortal. While the revolution had been fought in the name of liberty, Hamilton believed that true power lay not in freedom, but in credit. Nations, like people, live or die by their ability to borrow. It was 1790. The young republic was bankrupt in every sense. The states had war debts they couldn't pay. The federal government had no taxing power. Gold and silver coins barely circulated. Most had fled overseas. America's economy was running on IOUs and faith. And faith, as everyone had learned from the Continental dollar, could evaporate overnight. Hamilton's genius, and his danger, was that he saw chaos not as a problem, but as an opportunity. He convinced Congress to assume all state debts, binding the 13 states under one financial roof. The move sounded patriotic. In reality, it concentrated power. From that day on, the nation's creditors, the bondholders, the merchants, the early bankers, had a stake in the survival of the federal government. Debt became glue, and Hamilton was the chemist. But glue alone isn't money. You need a mechanism to make it flow. That mechanism was the Coinage Act of 1792. On paper, it looks simple. Create the U.S. Mint in Philadelphia, define the dollar in terms of both gold and silver, and regulate all coinage by weight and purity. But behind the legal language hid a new kind of monetary constitution, one that made metal the measure of trust and the government the arbiter of value. Hamilton's report to Congress on the establishment of a mint was a masterpiece of control disguised as reason. He proposed a bimetallic standard, fixing the ratio between gold and silver at roughly 15 to 1. For every 15 ounces of silver, 1 ounce of gold. The logic was elegant. It allowed citizens to use either metal, supposedly ensuring flexibility, but in practice it created a lever of power. If the market ratio drifted, as it always does, one metal would disappear, melted or exported for profit, leaving the other to dominate. This wasn't a bug, it was a feature. The government could adjust ratios, pulling wealth silently from one class to another, from debtor to creditor, from farmers to financiers. And while Americans celebrated their new hard money, another machine was already humming. The First Bank of the United States, chartered in 1791. The timing was no coincidence. The bank could issue paper notes backed by government debt, redeemable in the very gold and silver defined by the Coinage Act. It was a perfect loop. Debt backed by metal, metal defined by law, law enforced by the same debt, a perpetual motion machine of credit. Hamilton had effectively merged public finance with private banking. His system didn't abolish the monarchy, it replaced it with arithmetic. The king was dead, but interest lived on. Every coin minted carried not just an eagle and a liberty cap, but the invisible signature of creditors who now ruled through numbers. Jefferson saw it coming. He warned that banking establishments are more dangerous than standing armies. But his warnings drowned under the practical hunger for stability. Merchants wanted reliable coins, soldiers wanted pay, and the government wanted legitimacy. And Hamilton delivered, with a pen and a ratio. It's easy to think this was just good policy, the foundation of America's financial success. But look deeper, and you'll see the same pattern that would repeat for centuries. Public virtue on the surface, private extraction underneath. The Coinage Act was the outer shell, the mint, the coins, the silver dollar in your hand. The real power lay beneath, in the mechanism that bound citizens to a monetary ideal they could never fully control. Because once you define money by law, you've declared that value itself is political. The act didn't just measure silver. It measured loyalty, productivity, and who got to call themselves sound. And like every great system, it began with good intentions and perfect equations. Arithmetic cannot be deceived, but it can be used. For the first few decades after 1792, it seemed as if Hamilton had been right. The young republic's money gleamed with moral certainty. Silver dollars rang pure, gold eagles shone in the hands of merchants. Every coin carried the promise of the new order, liberty, struck in metal, backed by law. America looked stable, disciplined, and destined for greatness. But illusions always start as successes. The Coinage Act had created a myth so elegant that even its victims believed in it, that value could be frozen in time. That if $1 equals 371.25 grains of silver, then prosperity itself could be standardized. The newspapers of the early 1800s called it the American system of sound money. Farmers trusted it, bankers worshipped it, and politicians swore to defend it. Meanwhile, something subtle was happening. The world beyond America's shores, the markets, the mines, the ships, was already tearing that ratio apart. New silver from Mexico, new gold from Brazil, wars in Europe, shifting trade flows. Every shock twisted the global ratio of gold to silver. But inside the United States, the ratio was frozen by law. The 15-to-1 rule that had looked so scientific in Hamilton's report became a trap. When silver became cheaper abroad, American merchants melted their coins and shipped them overseas. When gold became overvalued, the reverse happened. The mint kept striking coins, but the real money kept escaping. The economy began to run on paper promises once more, issued by state-chartered banks that printed notes redeemable someday in the missing metal. The illusion was complete. Americans thought they were on a metallic standard. when in reality they were already living in a paper one. By 1820, the country's growth looked unstoppable. New states joined the Union, canals cut across the wilderness, cotton and wheat poured from the interior to the ports. The economy seemed healthy because credit was expanding. Banks multiplied, each issuing their own notes, each promising redemption in gold or silver that barely existed in their vaults. As long as everyone believed, the machine turned. It was the golden age of confidence. And confidence is always the last ingredient before collapse. Hamilton's formula, law, metal, debt, had created its own shadow economy. The official money was measured in grains. The real money was trust. You could walk into a tavern in 1830 and pay with a note from a local bank no one outside that county had ever heard of, and the bartender would still smile, because he believed. He believed that somewhere, somehow, the United States Mint in Philadelphia was guarding the silver that gave that paper its meaning. Belief became the true currency. And as long as no one demanded redemption, the illusion held. The government, of course, was pleased. Trade expanded, taxes flowed. The new American elite, merchants, railroad financiers, land speculators, grew rich. The very people who benefited most from Hamilton's system began to shape policy, newspapers, even elections. The rhetoric of sound money became a moral weapon. To question the gold-silver ratio was to question the republic itself. But every illusion carries its arithmetic. Beneath the prosperity, the math was diverging. The fixed legal ratio could not track the world's shifting markets. The more America traded, the more its sound system leaked wealth abroad. The coins were symbols, not stores of value. And yet no one dared to change the formula, because to admit the mistake would mean admitting that law cannot command value. That's how illusions grow, by silence. And so for half a century, America lived in a double world, one of metal in principle, paper in practice. Farmers borrowed in hard dollars, paid back in depreciated notes. Banks promised convertibility they couldn't deliver, and politicians praised stability while quietly praying no one tested it. The Coinage Act of 1792 had done its job. It had built faith. But faith is the most dangerous currency of all. It multiplies faster than gold can be mined, faster than silver can be minted, until one day the numbers outgrow the vault. That day was coming. The illusion of the solid dollar was about to meet the immovable truth, arithmetic. If you're starting to see how belief can outweigh gold, leave a comment, because belief, even now, is what keeps every dollar alive. Every monetary illusion ends the same way, with someone asking for the metal back. By the 1830s, the cracks in Hamilton's elegant machine had become impossible to hide. The coins were gone, melted, exported, hoarded. The banks were bloated with paper promises they could never redeem. And the ratio fixed by law, 15-1, no longer reflected reality. In the global market, silver was slipping, gold was rising. Every transaction in America was a quiet, arithmetic rebellion against the Coinage Act of 1792. Then came the reckoning. In 1834, Congress, under President Andrew Jackson, changed the ratio to roughly 16-1, officially to correct distortions. But the correction was just a euphemism for confession. The law had been lying, and the math had caught up. The adjustment made gold slightly overvalued relative to silver, and suddenly gold poured back into circulation. Silver fled instead. The cage had been rebuilt, but the animals were still wild. Jackson called it a triumph of democracy, restoring hard money to the people. In truth, it was a controlled demolition of Hamilton's system. Jackson hated banks with the fury of a man who had seen too many farmers ruined by credit. He killed the Second Bank of the United States in 1836, declaring victory over the money power. But without a central mechanism, the nation's paper and metal drifted apart. For a few years, it looked like freedom. Then came 1837, the panic. Speculators who had borrowed cheap paper found themselves owing in hard coin that no longer circulated. Land prices collapsed, banks failed, wages vanished. The mint's silver and gold definitions remained unchanged, but reality refused to obey. The Coinage Act's arithmetic, pure, cold, perfect, met the chaos of debt and demand, and the system broke. The irony was brutal. A law written to guarantee stability had produced cycles of boom and ruin. Every attempt to restore metallic truth, by changing the ratio, revaluing gold, or adjusting redemption rules, only exposed how political money really was. By the 1850s, the illusion was gone. California gold discoveries flooded the economy with new metal, making silver underpriced and driving it out entirely. The bimetallic standard was now a one-legged stool. Officially, both metals were money. Practically, only one survived: gold. The silver dollar, defined by the Act of 1792, became a ghost, legal in name, extinct in use. But arithmetic wasn't finished yet. The Civil War brought the next collapse. In 1862, the U.S. suspended specie payments altogether. No more redemption of paper for gold or silver. Congress printed greenbacks, unbacked by anything but necessity and faith. The Constitution hadn't changed. The Coinage Act still said a dollar was 371.25 grains of silver. But in the hands of a soldier or a shopkeeper, a dollar was now just ink and paper. For 70 years, the American people had lived under the illusion that law could bind value. Now, reality taught its lesson. When war, debt, and expansion collide, metal bends first. The hidden beneficiaries were, as always, those who understood before the rest. The bankers who exchanged gold for government bonds when paper was cheap. The speculators who bought land with inflated greenbacks and sold it later for gold. The arithmetic of empire never rewards the honest believer, only the early realist. And yet, even as the system cracked, the myth endured. People still spoke reverently of the dollar of our fathers, the honest coinage of 1792, the silver and gold that once defined truth itself. But arithmetic cannot be undone by nostalgia. The numbers had spoken, and they said, there is no fixed value in a moving world. The Coinage Act of 1792, once a pillar of certainty, had become a historical monument, beautiful, moral, and useless. A nation that had tried to define honesty in metal had discovered that honesty without flexibility becomes tyranny. If you've ever felt that today's dollar is built on faith alone, remember, this isn't new. America already lived this cycle once. It just had the decency then to call it by its real name: a panic. If this part hit a nerve, share it, because arithmetic doesn't take sides. It just waits. The Coinage Act of 1792 is rarely mentioned today, buried under newer laws, newer panics, and newer ideologies. But if you peel back the centuries, you'll see that the same mechanism still hums beneath every modern economy. The names have changed: Federal Reserve, quantitative easing, monetary policy. But the logic is the same: the illusion of control through law and the quiet concentration of power through money. After the Civil War, America abandoned the pretense of bimetallism. The Coinage Act of 1873, called by its enemies the Crime of 73, officially demonetized silver. Overnight, 1/2 of Hamilton's balance vanished. From that point forward, gold alone ruled, and the farmers, miners, and debtors, the ones who had believed the promise of money of the people, saw their world tighten. Loans became heavier, land cheaper, wages stagnant. The bankers, however, rejoiced. Gold meant discipline, not for them, but for everyone else. Every dollar owed was worth more tomorrow than today. Every crisis strengthened the hands that held the metal. By the time of the 1896 election, the nation had split along a monetary fault line. William Jennings Bryan shouting, "You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold," against the machinery of Wall Street and the East Coast elites. He lost. Arithmetic won again. Gold ruled until 1933, when Franklin D. Roosevelt, facing another collapse, finally tore the mask off. He confiscated private gold, devalued the dollar, and redefined lawful money with a signature. In a single act, the promise of 1792 was reversed. What had been a citizen's right to gold became a government's monopoly over it. The mint still stamped coins, but the meaning of value had shifted from metal to decree. Then came 1971, Nixon, cameras, and the last great confession. When he closed the gold window and ended convertibility, he didn't destroy the system, he completed it. For the first time in American history, the dollar had no anchor, no ratio, no measurable link to anything real. The arithmetic was now pure abstraction. And yet, just as in 1792, it was still presented as stability. Temporary measure, they called it. Half a century later, it remains the foundation of the global order. So here we are, in a world Hamilton would recognize instantly. Paper and digits instead of coins, but the same belief structure. Central banks promise sound money. Governments legislate definitions. And ordinary people live inside a monetary fiction maintained by trust, law, and inertia. The same illusion that value can be commanded from above continues, only with faster printing presses and more zeros on the screen. When the Federal Reserve expands its balance sheet, it does what the mint once did. It creates money by decree. The metals are gone, but the mechanism remains, favoring those closest to the source. In 1792, it was the creditors who held gold. In 2025, it's the banks and funds who hold bonds. Different coins, same hierarchy. And every time a crisis hits, 1929, 2008, 2020, the government repeats Hamilton's ritual. Intervene, redefine, stabilize. The arithmetic bends, the faith endures. We still measure trust in dollars, still worship price stability, still pretend the formula is eternal. But deep down, the lesson of the Coinage Act whispers beneath it all. Value defined by law is value waiting to escape. The ghost of the silver dollar walks in every financial debate today. It's in the inflation numbers no one believes, in the digital currency experiments of central banks, in the silent war between money that serves people and money that rules them. The ghost asks the same question Hamilton never truly answered. Who decides what a dollar is worth? Nature, law, or power? Look closely, and you'll see the cycle completing again. When numbers outgrow gold, systems break. When credit outgrows income, societies bend. The form changes from coin to code, but the mathematics never lies. If you're hearing this in 2025, understand this. The old Coinage Act isn't dead. It's just gone virtual. If this struck something true, tell me, because the ghost of 1792 is still in your wallet. If there's one thing the Coinage Act of 1792 teaches, it's that civilizations fall not when they lose their wealth, but when they lose the meaning of value. America tried to anchor that meaning in metal and ended up proving that no substance, not even gold, can restrain human ambition. Every generation believes it has solved the problem of money. The founders thought silver and gold would guarantee honesty. The 20th century thought central banks would guarantee stability. The 21st believes algorithms, data, and policy models can guarantee control. But the same equation keeps reappearing in different costumes. Promises growing faster than what can redeem them. In 1792, they minted faith into coins. In 2025, we mint faith into pixels. Back then, people trusted a ratio, 15 ounces of silver to 1 of gold. Now they trust interest rates, yield curves, and balance sheets none of us can see. Yet the arithmetic doesn't care about symbols. It only counts claims against reality. That's why Hamilton's legacy is both genius and curse. He built a system where trust could be manufactured, and once you can manufacture trust, you can manufacture empires. The United States rose not just by its industry or armies, but by exporting belief in its money. The world bought the same illusion the founders sold to themselves, that law can define value. But laws change. Numbers don't. The Coinage Act of 1792 was repealed, revised, forgotten. Yet its ghost lingers because the underlying temptation never dies. the temptation to define truth by decree, to legislate honesty, to believe that if we can write it into the statute, we can make it real. Every fiat currency, every digital coin, every central bank promise is a descendant of that same desire. Here's the uncomfortable moral. Systems don't collapse because of villains. They collapse when numbers outgrow reality, when promises exceed production, when credit exceeds trust. The founders tried to weld morality to metal. We've tried to weld it to code. Neither can hold forever. If you're hearing this now, in a world where money exists only as light on a screen, remember this. Arithmetic is patient. It waits through centuries. It waited after 1792. It waited after 1971. And it's waiting still. The question is whether we'll see the pattern before it resets itself again, or whether, like those who minted liberty into silver, we'll only understand once the vault is empty. If this history changed how you see the dollar in your hand, share it, because the law America forgot isn't just about coins. It's about what we choose to call real.